across the Atlantic looking for common ground. So you see there's some chairs up here. I didn't want them to feel like, in a fishbowl up here. But what I think I could do is I have your bios here. So perhaps as I read your bio, you'll come up. So Peter, you're first, alphabetically. So Peter Dirks studied English, language and literature, philosophy and history at universities in Utrecht, Glasgow, and Berlin. From 1977 to 1989, he taught at the Humanist Training Institute of the Dutch Humanist Association, and since then he's worked at, where they all come from, University of Humanistic Studies in Utrecht, first as an associate professor in the history of humanism, and from 2003 to September 2016 as full professor of humanism and worldviews. His research has focused on the interface of humanism as a meaning frame and aging well. Joachim is professor of humanism and philosophy at the University of Humanistic Studies in Utrecht, the Netherlands. He has published books and articles on humanism and religion, resilience, exemplars, empathy, relational autonomy, mimetic theory. The central motive and main question of his work is expressed by the core concepts of mimesis, and we're going to be talking about that, because I don't know if anybody knows what that is. Have a seat. Mary Vendel is an assistant professor in history of humanism at the University of Humanistics in Utrecht. She studied art history and archaeology at the University of Amsterdam and wrote her PhD thesis on Ficino and fantasy, imagination in the Renaissance, art and art theory. She also worked as director of studies of art history and vice director at the Royal Netherlands Institute in Rome. So thank you so much. And that leaves Ian. I'm going to get it right, he said. Professor of Empowerment of Vulnerable Older Adults at the University of Humanistic Studies in Utrecht, the Netherlands. Her research is focused on persons who are less able to deal with the complexity of daily life. Questions about social vulnerability, loneliness, social isolation, relational involvement, and meaningfulness are central to her work. She wrote several books and articles on social context, loneliness, and social isolation, and she's a member of the Scientific Advisory Committee of the Dutch government for the policy to combat loneliness and social isolation. So. Good, okay. I didn't want to stand behind you. Okay, so we've got you all wired up, and we can also leave some time for Q&A. So they're kind of, I told them I was going to do this, and I thought it would be easier because they had these wonderful long presentations, but maybe it's intimidating. I hope not. It's a very friendly group, and they really want to get to know you and learn more about you. So I wonder who among you might represent the university to first of all tell us about what goes on there. So I had the great good fortune of visiting there a couple of years ago when I was on my summer sabbatical. So one of you please, or maybe all of you, but tell us something about the actual university and what goes on there. Decide among yourselves. Hey, stay seated, that's why we have a stage. Everyone can see you.
Can you hear me?
Yeah. Project your voice.
I think that one of the main things of the university is to present humanism as something positive, not as something negative, meaning that we don't believe in God, we don't believe in an afterlife, etc.
Can you give him the mic?
He has a mic.
Turn the volume up.
You need to talk into it.
Why not use the hand mic?
No, we're not. We have a very helpful group.
What I just said is that we want to present humanism as something positive and not as denying this or denying that, denying the existence of God or an afterlife, etc. But we want to present it as something positive, and thinking about what a way would be to do that. We have found the idea of a meaningful life. Humanism is a meaning frame. It's a set of ideas and practices to help people to live a meaningful life, and that's how we look at it. And thinking about this, we thought there might be a danger in this as well, because when you help people to find a meaningful life in whatever circumstances they live in, you might get the danger that you ignore the circumstances and are trying to get people to accept the situation they're in without trying to improve the situations they are in, and without trying to improve society and to attend to social changes going on and trying to improve them. So the university decided to have two main things to work on, which is a meaningful life for everyone in a just society. And those are the two things that the university focuses on in a variety of ways. Perhaps somebody else wants to say something more about this.
Yes, I agree with Peter that humanism, we take humanism as a meaning frame in a societal and social context. I myself, I would add the aspect that humanism is a tradition, in the literary sense of the word. It's being passed on since Renaissance or even since antiquity of humanist values, humanist meanings, humanist ideas, concepts, etc. And they are passed on and always being reinterpreted by new generations in new contexts. For example, from Renaissance to Enlightenment, 19th century, 20th century to the 1st century, much has changed. And humanism is always this critical tradition, this critical being passed on of ideas for the sake of humaneness. And of course, we don't know exactly what humaneness is, but it is our task to discuss about it and to have debates on it and to always still reinterpret the meaning of this humaneness. That's why humanism is a critical tradition. It's for the sake of humanity. And yesterday I explained that this tradition, this being passed on of humanist values and meanings, is done by exemplary figures, exemplary people, from Erasmus and others to Enlightenment until the present day. Exemplary figures who embody, who demonstrate, or realize those humanist values. Humanist values is not something up there in an abstract sense. No, humanist values is something that is applied, that is concrete, that it's physical, it's realized. And that's the way we know at all about humanist values, by taking inspiration from exemplary people. So that's in my opinion, the way humanism works. Big tradition, but also some well, how can I say this? Not a great tradition, but more single traditions. I mentioned two examples. I mentioned the example of the humanist essay tradition. Essay being something between fiction and non-fiction. And the essay is a typical humanist genre. And the other quite different example I gave was about black humanism. Black humanism, emancipation, maybe for social justice, etc. That takes advantage of the examples from the past in that humanist tradition.
Another thing that we focused on during the symposium was on the aging. And so Anya, I wish you could please tell us something about your work. And you also told us about a case study that you've been working on. And I know I asked a question of you as well, in terms of how humanists and humanist congregations and communities might better be aware of the issues of the aging and might better care for them in a very respectful and dignified way. So could you please tell us about your work?
Yes, I think in the Netherlands and in a lot of Western countries there is much attention for people who get older, because we have to do with much more people who are getting much more older than a few decades ago. And the attention is especially on the physical consequences of this older being old, and the cognitive dimensions of being old. And in our research group, we focus on other aspects of being old, namely the social and existential problems that comes with getting older. So the losses people have to deal with because their friends or neighbors or family or partners fall away, because their health gets worse, because they don't have a social role anymore, because society thinks people are only important if they contribute in a society way, because they have paid work or something like that. So we focus on what is aging well in more existential and social terms, and try to contribute to a more humane world and dignity for people who are older and who face the end of life.
And Marika, you talked to us yesterday about art and the ways in which artists were influenced by humanists. And Joachim, you mentioned essayists. There were also folks who were writing in a sort of a humanist tradition, and Michelangelo was inspired by them. And so you took us kind of through some of that work. So can you maybe reprise for us how you took a look at that connection between sort of the humanist philosophers and writers and the artists who were inspired by them, and kind of you were talking to us about the humanist values, that it really is all relational. It kind of went back to an earlier time, and it also, because so much of the art that was prevalent was Christian art, and that this made it more humane.
Yes, thank you. I think I would sort of take the microphone. Might be better.
Is this better?
Yes.
Yes, it's difficult to say it in a few minutes, but as Joachim said, humanism is part of a large tradition, and in my work I try to study the ways in which humanism develops itself through time, and in the different ways this term of this idea of humanism is adapted all the time by new groups and reinvented. In fact, it's in fact also part of a sort of creative process, that is, humanism is adapted every time again to new situations and new groups. And then while doing this research, I stumbled upon this Amsterdam Declaration. I don't know if you're acquainted with that, but it is a sort of list. It's a sort of list of things that humanism stands for. It is made up in the 50s, but also renewed in 2002. And I came across a sentence that was in there, and it said that humanism values the art, and especially creativity, human imagination, and the transformative power of art. So I was very much interested in it, because as studying Renaissance humanism, I found out that this idea of art, that it is transformative and that it's appealing also to the human imagination. It comes from Renaissance humanism and in the collaboration that artists had with humanists at the time. So that was my talk about, so this idea of transformation, that art transforms you, and that the human imagination is something really creative. It comes from this period, and especially that artists collaborated a lot with humanists at the time. And then I showed a few examples, for instance, like drawing of Michelangelo, but also other paintings in where you see that these works are visualized. So that was what my talk in short was about yesterday.
Thank you. I want to get back to Joachim. I mean, because what you were talking about yesterday was moral resilience. And you used an example of a young woman, well, she was a girl at the time, who had been kidnapped and was held in isolation, and how she was able to to sustain herself in that situation by using her imagination. And I think, I think of John Dewey. We talked about him yesterday as being, a pragmatist and humanist who gave a lot of attention to imagination. And Marika, you also talked a lot about imagination. And I think, and you talked about sort of one's life narrative, the story that one tells. And so I think that's kind of a theme that kind of holds it together in terms of imagination and narrative. So some people may not be aware, or it may have been just a small news item that people didn't pay attention to, but could you please tell us that story and how it contributes to that concept of moral resilience?
It's a story of a child, a 10 years old Austrian girl, who was abducted and held in prison for 8.5 years. It's incredible. From 10 to 18 years old, she was just held in prison in a small dungeon in the basement of an Austrian villa in Vienna, in the suburb of Vienna. And when she escaped from the prison, after she wrote this book, and this book is called 3096 Days. 3096 days, that was the year of her imprisonment. And during that imprisonment, she showed resilience. Of course, she didn't use this word herself, but she survived by constantly relating to her abductor, and she kept seeing him as a human. Even she was maltreated and abused, etc. And starvation was one of the weapons of the abductor. So she was very, very seriously maltreated. Still, she kept seeing him as a human. Otherwise, she said, I wouldn't have survived. If I would have seen him as a monster, then I couldn't survive. But always trying to negotiate, so to speak, and trying to see and to get some room for herself in this very, very harsh situation at first. And she used her imagination. She had fantasy. She could read books in her imprisonment, and even school books, because her abductor bought school books from her so that she can learn something. But she was held as a slave. So I think she was his slave. But thanks to her imagination and narrative capacity and her ability to keep seeing him as a human, she survived. And I thought this resilience, and it's a very harsh story, but for the research it's very interesting because there's only one relationship. That's very exceptional. I mean, we have many relationships with our environment, etc. And this girl had only one relationship. So the whole origin, the whole development of her resilience, you can read it in her book. And it's fascinating. It's terrible, but also fascinating. and she survived. She escaped once. If I may.
Yes, and please tell the story about she imagined herself older.
That's what I quoted yesterday in the lecture. One of her fantasies was that she talked with her older self. As a 12-year-old girl, she made fantasies. She imagined her 18-year-old self speaking with her. Of course, in her imagination. And that 18-year-old self said to the 12-year-old Natasha, I'll get you out here. Not yet, because you're not strong enough. You cannot escape now. But I will help you. And that was her 18-year-old self. And in fact, she escaped when she was 18. So this was an appointment, a pact that she made with her older self in her fantasy. Yeah, it's very, very impressive. I would everybody advise to read that book. It's also in English. 3096 days. 3096 days is the title, and the girl is called Natasha Kampusch. It's a German name, she's from Austria. They speak German. Natasha Kampusch. Kampusch. Kampusch.
Thank you so much. Peter, I want to get back to you because, well, first of all, you and I met when you were here years ago because the Humanist Institute was meeting here. We were hoping to have some exchange. So I wonder if you can tell us a little bit about the differences that you have observed between Dutch humanism and American humanism. I think some things came out over the weekend, and I think you raised the question about that American humanists pay a lot of attention to science, and we sort of responded, well, we kind of need to, given all the creationists that are here. And that maybe the Dutch, with their better education system, don't have that concern, so maybe that's a reason that humanists don't address that issue. But I'm wondering if you could maybe speak through some of the differences that you either knew about before, because you've had a lot of interaction with American humanists, or things that may have come up for you in the last couple of days.
Well, one of the things I noticed coming here in 1997 was that the American humanists pay a lot more attention to science, and especially natural science. American humanists pay a lot more attention to science, especially natural science, than humanists in the Netherlands. And in the Netherlands, humanism is mainly about ethics and about humanities and philosophy. And in the US, I noticed that there was a lot of talk about natural science, about evolution, about Darwin Day, and against creationism. And that shows that humanism might have the same values, but depending on the context where you live, it will have different priorities. In the Netherlands, it would be completely useless to put the fight against creationism at the center of humanism, because we hardly have any creationists. So it depends on the situation. Depends on the situation where you live, what you have to put at the center of your humanist attention.
If you'd like to say more, that's fine. And I noticed that Joachim had a little stage whisper about the Dutch Bible Belt. I suspect there are as many there as there are here.
We have also a Bible Belt. It's a minority in Netherlands, but it has to have much influence in the government.
I live in this Bible Belt.
Oh, you're telling us about the changes that you saw there.
I live in a small village in the center of this Bible Belt, and 300 meters from my house is a church. And living there for 13 years now, I noticed changes going on. When we arrived there, the women would have long skirts almost to the ground. The skirts would all be in black. They go into the church, they would all have a plastic bag with a hat in it, because in church the women should have a hat on. And over the years I saw things change. I saw more color in the clothing of the people. They would have red and light blue and all kinds of colors, which was completely unimaginable 30 years ago. And the skirts of the women would come short. So there is this minority in the Netherlands of about, it might be 5% of the people, but even within this very fundamentalist group, you see changes. And I recently visited one of their meetings because a colleague of mine is doing research on people in that part of the country. And together we went to this church meeting, and I was really struck by this very strange contrast, because there was a preacher. He was talking about hell, and we need salvation, and we can't do anything about it ourselves, and we need the grace of God. But it was hardly about grace, but mostly it was about damnation and hell and terrible things. And what struck me was that
this terrible talk, and the people were enjoying themselves. I thought it was very sweet. Okay.
Thank you. I want to get back to you, Anya, because if you could tell us something about your case study with Mr. S. And what I found so remarkable about it was not only that you had been called in by a social worker to work with him, but the way that the research that you're doing, and also the work that you do in a policy-making way for the Dutch government, but also in the way, as he was telling you his life story, that you saw some transformation in him. So could you please tell us that story?
Yes, my research is on loneliness and social isolation, and 11 years ago I made contact with some men in the city of Rotterdam, the second greatest city in the Netherlands, and he lives totally in isolation. He has no contacts. He was grown up in a family with 2 brothers, but he has lost the contact with his brothers. He had work till he was 52, and then he was fired and never had paid work again. And since then he lives his life alone. I came in contact with him because a social worker introduced me to him, and this social worker did know him because in the city of Rotterdam they have some kind of intervention teams, and that are people that follow up signals of neighbors that are worried about someone in the street because they think there's something wrong with this person. And this neighborhood found this intervention team, and this intervention team visited this man, and then they obliged him to accept a visit from a social worker. And this social worker introduced me to this man, and from then on, 11 years ago, I have been in contact with him, and I visit him once a year, and we talk hours and hours about his life and how he explains his situation himself and how he deals with his isolated situation. And he does very well. He has some strengths, but at the same time he misses the social contact, the laugh and the attention from other people. And now in 11 years I noticed that our conversations have been changed because he asked something about my life that was not, that he doesn't do that when the first years when we met. But now the first question he asked me when I was a few weeks ago at his home was how I was doing, and if I'm still working in Utrecht, and how it was at the university, and how it was if my husband was something who cares for me. That was what he asked me. And he told me a lot about his reflections about his life, because he's getting older. He's 84 years old now, and he is reflecting on his life, and he has a very great need to have someone that listens to his life story, because he struggles with guilt and shame about the fact that he has lost the contact with his parents, his brothers. He thinks he has done a lot of grief to his mother, and he cannot redress that anymore because she is not alive anymore. So he has a very strong need to talk about his life with someone about that kind of things, to deal with it and to have peace in life. Now he's getting older and the end is near. That's what he says. So the social contact he has never had in his life, and he had all kinds of strategies to compensate that, but in the end a real person who listens to him, who has attention for his life and the person who he is very important for him. So at the end we all need this.
You once told me, Anya, that this Mr. S has a special ritual of being in contact with other people without being in contact with other people. And it's fascinating that it is, well, I think it's a survival strategy.
Yes.
But it's a ritual, that makes it so interesting.
Yes, what he does is to feel connected with other people is get into the tram and ride from the one side of the city to the other, and he says people get on the tram and people got off, and I feel embedded because without being really directed. I see them come in and come out, and I feel part of a community without personal contact with all those people in the tram.
Yeah, it's fascinating,
Yes.
this ritual. He found himself this way of dealing with his social isolation.
Yes.
And it's enough for this guy. I mean,
That was enough, but now he's older, it's not
Yeah.
enough anymore, because he thinks it's very superficial. He thinks he needs someone who sees him as the person he is, and then you have to talk about your life and about your reflection, and reflect about what's happened in your life and how to deal with it.
Thank you. I have one more question for Marika, and then we're going to open it up to others. So, Marika, you said that obviously you're very interested in art, and you've been going to some museums around here. We have many art lovers here, and we have a couple of people who have even been docents. So I know this is maybe a little strange question, but I still want to ask you this. What will you be looking for as an art lover and as a humanist when you're going to be going to these museums? And are there perhaps highlights that you'll be going to that maybe are members because they live here and they don't notice things? I'll speak for myself. Because I live here, I'll use I statements, we always say that. And sometimes I don't notice things or I just take them for granted. What should we not take for granted, perhaps as humanists, since it's a human circle, when we're looking at art, and what will you be looking for?
Especially in New York, you mean?
Yeah.
One thing that I will be visiting, hopefully, is the Morgan Library. Because in the Morgan Library there are a lot of extremely beautiful illuminated manuscripts from the Renaissance that, in a way, form a tradition of modern humanism as well. So that's one of the things that I hope to see. And both the combination of these beautiful illuminations, but also these important texts that are so fundamental. And then, of course, I cannot miss the Metropolitan Museum of Art, because it has almost everything that humanity has produced in an artistic way. Of course, I am extremely interested in the Italian art department, but I would also be able to miss the Dutch art. But then it would be difficult to make a choice between all these beautiful things. So if I would at least advise to visit it once a year, but maybe even once a month, because there's so much to see. But you probably already do that. I don't know.
Maybe during lunch you can give her recommendations.
Yes.
Amy has the mic, and so if you have questions, please raise your hand and Amy will come over to you with the open mic.
Hi. I grew up in northern England, and my family used to go to humanist meetings. The reason they went, we also went to the church as well, you know, but the reason they would go is that the humanists in England were very focused on animals and working with animals. And it was a very big thing. And my father would say, this is the only group that loves animals. I just wanted to know, you know, whether it was the same in the Netherlands. Yeah.
Anyone can answer. Okay, let's look because of Lucas.
Yeah, well.
You're done.
I would like to say something about this, not just because I love animals and have a beautiful dog, but when I started to study the history of humanism, being appointed as the teacher of the history of humanism, I was looking for when was the word humanism for the first time used in the Dutch language. And I found in the largest dictionary of the Dutch language that the first time the dictionary knew, because I found earlier ones later, but the first time the dictionary knew was in 1872 when Johannes van Vleuten wrote about the treatment of animals and said that what we need is humanism toward animals. And that was the first time the word humanism was used according to this large dictionary. I was really struck by that.
Anyone else? Any other questions? Oh, what?
Yes, the gentleman was mentioned relationship autonomy. That's an interesting thing. Somebody told me a new book about Dorothy Sayers came out, how she changed women's thinking in the 20s, the 30s, and 40s, and 50s in England, in the United States also. And could you speak a little bit about the relationship autonomy and how that is, especially with people who are older? And I guess it seems like there's a lot of ambivalence. People who want their autonomy, and they want a relationship, and when that's just older people, like people of all ages, balancing those two, I think, sometimes competing values.
Thank you. Good question. I think you're stressing you now.
Who are you asking? Me?
I think you're asking mine, yes.
Well, autonomy is never assured, it's never guaranteed. I see autonomy as a response to preceding heteronomy, which is the opposite of autonomy. We start as newborns, we're totally dependent on others, etc. So during growing up, we can we develop a little bit of autonomy, and autonomy is always related to others. So autonomy is not something on its own, and I cannot be autonomous on my own. Autonomy is the way I respond to all those, for example, pressure or challenges, and etc. And the real autonomy is something that has to do with the imagination we discussed earlier here. It's a creative act to realize autonomy, but it's always restricted, and it's always in a way of responding to heteronomy. I hope this answer satisfies you.
Yeah, I guess it's, certainly in this country, I think like a lot of people, like in this city, they say half the people are living alone, or they're not married, or they died, for whatever reason. A lot of people are living alone, but they still want this conflict, like this gentleman.
It's a perfect example.
Yeah, it's sort of like dealing with that competing, because in some ways, when they're children, they can't be as bad autonomous, they're independent. And when they're older, they can't, they're more independent also. Like that, I mean, balancing those competing, I don't know.
Yeah, thank you. Well, let's answer that, and we have a couple more questions. Do you want to respond to that?
Yes. Well, I'm very much interested in all those phenomena like peer pressure, group pressure, mimetic desire, so to say, liking something because others like it, and being influenced by others. And that's the big challenge for autonomy. You have to respond there. You should respond to these challenges in your own way, but you don't have to do it alone. You have these examples. You have these inspiring people that help you.
Yeah, thank you so much. Appreciate it.
Go ahead.
Hi, this is a question for any of you. I know the university that you guys work at presents humanism in a positive light, but I was wondering if any of you have experienced any downfalls in your practice, and what kind of sustains your practice.
What was the last sentence?
What sustains you in your work?
Yeah.
Yeah. How do you feel supported?
And has there ever been any kind of downfall in your work where you felt conflicted in your practice?
Well, I can say something about this if you want. Two things. First, the downfall, and then encouragement. The downfall. I was working at the University of Humanistic Studies, and I was part of the research committee. And we had meetings, and the chair of the committee said for next time in a month, I ask from all of you to write a statement about what is the center of the research of your group and how does every person's research relate to this. I said to the chair, I'm sorry, but I don't have the time. I'm working all day and almost all night, and I can't do it. I don't have the time for it. And the chair said, well, it has to be done. And the other people in the meeting, they all agreed, and I was the only one protesting. And, so in the end, I decided I have to do it. So before the next meeting, I was working till 3 o'clock at night, a few times, in order to have this piece of paper ready for the meeting. Then I arrived in the meeting, and the chair started the session and said, well, because nobody has written the piece, I'll decide that we don't deal with it today. I thought it was terrible. And after the meeting, one of my colleagues came up to me and said, I don't like it that you wrote this piece, because now it's all like we didn't do what we had to do. You shouldn't have written this. And, well, I don't know what's the word in English. I was overread. Well, anyway, I felt very bad, and I got ill. But I also met the chair of the committee, and walking to the station, he came on his bike and passed me. He stopped and said, I'm sorry, and I said, well, okay, that's fine, but next time you'll do the same. I was very angry. But what I learned from it was that I had very strict morality norms. When you promise to do something, you have to do it. So, and that's what really brought me into problems. And I learned from this that, okay, I promise something, and I'll seriously try to do it. But if I can't do it, I'll tell the people I promised it to that I won't do it, because I also have to take care of myself. And one of the ways of taking care of myself is what I recently wrote a piece about humanist spirituality. And I think humanist spirituality, if you want to use the term and give it a positive interpretation, humanist spirituality can be seen as really thinking about what are the most important goals in your life and making sure that you work on them and don't get sidelined to other things and the pressures of the day, etc., but keep focused on the things that you really find important. I think that's part of humanist spirituality, and one of the ways of doing this, another part of humanist spirituality is feeling part of something larger and feeling that this larger thing is important and is valuable. And in the end, I think spirituality is a practice. It's doing something regularly. And for me, the practice consists in walking with my dog, walking in nature, taking pictures of butterflies, and when, for instance, going to a national park and walking all day and taking pictures of butterflies,
I feel part of something very beautiful, and that gives me a lot of energy, and that well, I think that's my spirituality.
And it's also a very good example of autonomy. Keeping the eyes on the real goals, the real target, and don't be distracted by the illusion of the day, so to speak. So keep the eye on the real goals and being trouw aan jezelf and faithful to yourself in this respect. That makes you autonomous, and you can feel yourself part of a larger whole at the same time. So autonomy is not contradictory to be feeling part of something bigger, something greater.
I think we have time for two more questions. We've got David and I see Mo in the back. So two more, and then you're staying for lunch, so we'll have an opportunity to chat some more.
Thank you. This is a very, very interesting conversation. I have a question about, in line with the description of humanism as a tradition, how is it carried over through centuries? I'm interested in understanding better how, what type of work do you do at the university? What was the view of the humanist view in Europe with the arrival of many refugees from different cultures, and how humanism you think can be useful or is useful in strengthening the social fabric with the arrival of people from different backgrounds, with different cultures, because the way the world is presented right now is in a very negative and opposing views of them against us. So what's the role that the university or the things that the university is doing to bring people together, and or what do you think it could be useful for the humanist movement to do, both in Europe and here in the States?
I have not a simple answer to this very difficult question, because people from elsewhere, strangers, refugees, could be a real enrichment of your own culture. Like the United States, also the Netherlands is an immigration country. But if there's too much immigration and there are a whole flood of immigrants, then some difficulties rise, of course. So this is, I cannot solve this problem, but I'm glad that we have in Germany, for example, this Angela Merkel as the Prime Minister, who gives a good example, who would be an example if, well, being strict, but also saying welcome to the refugees. But I think the fundamental concept in this question is dialogue. And also dialogue is a humanist, without claiming the whole thing, dialogue is a very humanist practice. It means that you are very sure about yourself, and it's not submitting yourself or surrender or whatever. No, it's from a strong self-consciousness that you're interested in others, in strangers. But the current situation in Europe, and especially in the UK, and also in the Netherlands, is well, there is a hidden racism in this whole thing. I mean, this racism is of course officially forbidden, but it's very, very, very severe and very strong.
Marika, you look poised, so go ahead.
Yes, I think also the humanist tradition has something to say about it, because it is centered around this concept of humanitas, and the orator Cicero in Roman times already spoke about that. And one of the things he said is that, and he's talking about Roman high officials in this case, because that was his perspective. And he said, even if you would be in charge as a Roman official to barbarous people, so that's the language they used at the time, so we're speaking of people from Gaul or from Africa or Spain, for instance, then he said you would still be concerned about their welfare, because that is appealing to your humanitas, your humanity. And that is a central theme in the humanist tradition, I think, that there are all thoughts about how people can connect to other people, especially there are used all kind of ideas from antiquity, where it is thought that you can connect to other people because in the first place you can connect to your family or to the people that are your loved ones, but because you can connect to them, it is also possible to use your imagination to connect to people that are a little bit further away from you. And in fact, in that way you can use your imagination to connect or empathy to all of humanity. So that are maybe also elements that from the humanist tradition that you can use with these problems that arise. People are mixed with each other and seem not to understand each other.
Okay, so Peter wanted to say something, and then we have a last question from Mo.
Well, I think one of the main problems in European society, I don't know about the US exactly, but in European society there's a lot of discussion about the number of Muslim immigrants in Europe. And the position of humanists is very important. What is the position you take in this heated debate? And some of the humanists take the position, and that's not mine, but some of the humanists take the position that the real Islam is the terrorist Islam. And they point to a text in the Quran where it says that it said that people leaving Islam should be killed, etc. And some of the humanists keep saying that that is the real Islam. And when they meet friendly Muslim people on the street, well, they're exceptional, or they're not real Muslims, or they're friendly people, but that has nothing to do with their being Muslim. And I think it's very important for humanists to get alliances with what you might call friendly, enlightened Muslims, and help Muslims within the society of developing this strand, instead of keeping saying that the real Muslims are the terrible ones. And I think that's a very important issue for humanists. What position do you take? And I think it's very important that you take the right position in this area.
Thank you. Mo, you have our last question, and then of course we'll be together at lunch as well.
I think that both in the United States and Europe we're grappling with various social issues. One happened to be the impact of the environment degradation as it relates to the immigration, and also third world destruction, or what we call the South continent destruction. How does humanists in Europe, particularly in Netherlands, deal with these social issues and respond to it on the social level, political level, however you want to expand on it?
So, if I understand your question well, Peter just answered your question.
Peter only answered about the, I'm sorry, Peter only answered about the immigration. I'm asking about environmental issues. If you put that
Anya, looks like you're poised. Are you?
I don't know, but it's not necessary.
I can't understand. Can you hear what she's, can you tell what he's saying?
Mo, can you do it again?
Immigration was one of the issues that
Yes.
I think David brought up as a social issue that is a phenomenon between the United States and Europe to deal with. Environmental degradation and environmental issue is also a very important issue that is coming up on both sides of the aisles. Okay, so I'm saying that how do humanists in Europe deal with the environmental issues, and how do they stand?
Well, one way of doing this, because of course it's a very big issue, One of the ways of doing this is, I take one example of the Dutch-American researcher Frans de Waal, who is a primatologist who studies apes and other animals. And his goal, his inspiration is that he wants to show that other animals also have consciousness, have morality. And there's experiments with apes showing that also apes have a feeling of justice and equality and things like that. And by doing that, the core concept of humanity is not provided restricted to humans only, also other animals, and that makes serious consequences. For example, the meat industry and the way we treat animals in our industry. So I think the change should come from not from only from one side, but from many sides and many practices that are critically researched and challenged by humanists. Is that an answer?
Yes. Well,
of course, this is not the solution to the climate crisis.
Right.
This is not the one solution to the climate crisis. Many aspects of that, but it's just one thing.
I can hear, I know that we're going to have a wonderful lunch discussion because there's more things percolating here that people are going to want to know about. But now it's time for our collection. So as you know, every Sunday we take up a collection, and if you feel comfortable not being on display, feel free to move about wherever you